Hello, everyone. My name is Wendy Beckman, and I'm a registered dietitian with the New York State Office for the Aging and SNAP-Ed New York. Thanks so much for joining us today on Ask the Experts Nutrition Edition. I have with me today Beth Irish. She is also a registered dietitian, and she is the newest member of the nutrition team at the New York State Office for the Aging. So hello, Beth. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. It's really good to be here, and I'm really enjoying my new role with NYSOFA and with the SNAP-Ed program. It's a wonderful program. Just a little bit about me, I guess. I've been a New York State resident since I was a teenager, and I've lived in many parts of the state, and I worked in a variety of the areas around the state. And worked in a lot of different settings. I worked in hospitals, I worked in physicians' offices, I worked in community health, doing all different types of nutrition education. So it's really good to be here today, and thanks for having me, Wendy.
Yeah, thanks so much. And I'm glad that you gave us a little background on some of the things that you've done in the past. One of the things that Beth has sort of in her arsenal of knowledge is she is a certified diabetes educator. So, that's really great to have that knowledge on our team. And we are going to be talking today about heart health because February is National Heart Health Awareness Month. And the reason why every February is Heart Health Awareness Month is because heart disease is one of the #1 killers of Americans. And I know, Beth, that you've done some research for me and you have a little bit of information to share about heart health and why it's so important to talk about this topic. So go ahead and tell us some of those things.
Well, I'm just going to talk about a few general but very important things. Heart disease kills more people than all forms of cancer combined, which is pretty amazing. And according to the Center for Disease Control, heart disease is the leading cause of death in the United States. I always told the people that I was counseling that type 2 diabetes heart disease is the leading cause of death for people with type 2 diabetes. Often people think it's kidney failure or other issues, but it's heart disease that's the leading cause of death for people with type 2 diabetes. And in the United States, someone has a heart attack about every 40 seconds. But heart disease is not just about heart attacks. It includes strokes and heart failure and other cardiovascular diseases that kill many Americans every year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so all of those, some of those statistics are pretty shocking, but that's why it's so important to sort of educate yourself about heart health and what you can do to increase your chances of having a longer, heart healthier life. So we are going to be taking questions from the audience. So please feel free to put your questions in the chat box. We love to answer your questions. And I already have one. So the question is, to eat or not to eat eggs? Are egg yolks okay for heart health? And I know that sometimes with nutrition, it can be a little confusing because the evidence will sort of switch back and forth. There will be studies done and they'll say, oh, this food is not one that we want to focus on and stay away from this one. And eggs is one of those foods. The reason is because egg yolks are high in cholesterol. And most people know that high cholesterol in your blood is not good for heart health. But Beth, you tell me whether it's okay or not to eat eggs.
Well, as with most things in nutrition, moderation is the key. That's one of the foundations of nutrition. And we used to think the important thing about eggs was the cholesterol content. Newer research suggests that the more important thing is the saturated fat content of egg yolks. An egg yolk has both. They're not the same thing, but it looks like the saturated fat in an egg yolk is more important than the cholesterol content. That said, though, we want to keep saturated fat in our diet on the low side. So I would say my best answer to that is probably 3 to 6 a week egg yolks. Now the whites don't have cholesterol or saturated fat in them. So, we're not as concerned about that part of the egg, but I would limit my egg yolks, and that's in cooking too, to, maybe 3 to 6 a week. And there's still varying opinions on that, but the majority of registered dietitians probably would agree with me. I'm interested to find out if that's how Wendy feels about it as well.
Yeah, so I agree with you, Beth. I know that there used to be sort of a limit on eggs. The last I had heard was they just totally got rid of that recommendation altogether. That being said, you don't want to go completely crazy and have 6 eggs a day. That's a little excessive. Like Beth said, moderation is key, right?
Yeah, and I think
so.
No, I was
No,
just
go
going to
ahead.
say, a lot of people are focused on eating protein, and I've had some people I've talked to that are eating 3 to 6 eggs every day, and that's, while we don't have necessarily a limit, when I say 3 to 6, I'm trying to give you a little more definition around what moderation means. But again,
Right.
that's just a general guideline.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, eggs are an excellent source of protein. They're relatively inexpensive. So if that is a good source of protein for you that you can afford, then I would absolutely encourage you to have eggs and not worry that it's really going to contribute to heart disease. But as Elizabeth said, we're going to watch our saturated fat intake, and egg yolks do have some saturated fat in them. So we have another question. Is there a significance to your red outfits and the red quilt? So yeah, so I am a quilter. I've been doing it for a little over 20 years. I started when my son was about a year and a half old, and he's 25 now, so almost 26. So I can't believe that that's happened. So it's something that I enjoy doing, and I thought it would be a fun project for me to make new ones for every month. And last Friday was Wear Red for Heart Health Awareness Month. And the American Heart Association does that every year. The first Friday of February is always Wear Red for Heart Health Awareness Month. So we just thought we would match today, right? Because why
That's
not?
a good color.
Right. And next Monday is Valentine's Day, right? So everybody at least, sort of have those things in mind. I have another question. Is heart disease mostly a concern for males? And it seems like we hear more about men having heart attacks. And I agree that's something that we hear, but can you tell me anything about heart disease in women, Lisbeth?
Heart disease in women, well, the symptoms of a heart attack with women are often very different than men's. Women are protected from heart disease when we're younger because of the hormones we have. But as we lose those hormones, when we go through menopause, the risk for heart disease increases roughly equal to what men's is. So yeah, we have some protection earlier in life, but that fades over time, and we have the same risk as men, or very close to the same risk.
Right. When you look at some information from the Center for Disease Control, it says that heart disease is the leading cause of death in women in the United States. And in about 1 in every 5 female deaths is attributed to heart disease. And it is the leading cause of death for African American and white women in the United States. And about 1 in 16 women aged 20 and older have coronary heart disease, which is the most common heart disease. And we can talk a little bit about, there's several different types of heart disease. Lisbeth had mentioned strokes and heart attacks, but there's narrowing of the arteries and there's hardening of the arteries. And you may be familiar with those terms. Your doctor may have talked to you about them. Those are the ones that are primarily caused by both aging and by elevated cholesterol, blood cholesterol levels. So, that's those are all things that we kind of think about when we think about heart disease as a whole. So it actually encompasses several different disease processes. We have a question here. Is there anything that can substitute for water? And I'm assuming, as a beverage. Anything, when we think about beverages, we try to limit sugar sweetened beverages. So water, of course, is a really good choice because there's got nothing added to it, no excess sodium, no extra added sugars. But any other non-sugary drink, so coffee without sugar in it, tea without sugar in it. There are some drinks that have some artificial sweeteners in them. And, some people like to use those products, other people don't. It's really up to you if you want to add those into your diet or not. I really, really like what I have with me today is seltzer water. I have seltzer and I have a piece of lime in it. This seltzer water happens to be mango lime flavored and it's delicious, but there's no sodium and there's no sugar added to this. So, limiting sodium, and we'll talk a little bit about that later as well, but limiting sodium is one of the things that you want to do if you have heart disease, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. We have a question where, when replacing salt in the diet, what do you suggest for flavoring? Is garlic salt still considered salt? Give me an answer, Elizabeth.
Well, this word salt is a clue in that answer. Garlic salt is still salt. It's garlic powder combined with salt, but you can buy garlic powder by itself and eliminate the salt part of it. Or you can use fresh garlic.
Yes.
So there's lots of alternatives to using garlic salt, but yes, it is regular salt in there.
Yeah, and so one of the things that we like to talk about in SNAP Ed is reducing sodium intake, because many Americans get too much sodium in their diets. If you have high blood pressure or other types of heart disease, you do want to limit your sodium or reduce the amount of sodium that you're taking in your diet. And one of the ways that we teach people to do that is to use herbs and spices to flavor your food instead of salt. Cooking at home helps because you are then in control of what goes into your food, and you can measure how much salt you're adding and reduce it or eliminate it altogether. So I like to use oregano and basil on like a pork loin. It's one of my favorite things to use with garlic powder or fresh garlic. And in the chat box, can you guys think of, what are some of your favorite sort of herbs and spices that you like to use? We would love to hear those suggestions. So someone is saying, you mentioned different symptoms for women for heart attacks. Elizabeth, can you talk about that a little bit? Do you have that on the top of your head, what some of those symptoms are?
Yeah, some of them might be the same as men, but a lot of women might feel abdominal pain or nauseous, which isn't generally associated with symptoms of a heart attack, or they might feel kind of short of breath. So that overlaps a little, but I'd say, some of the abdominal symptoms are probably what makes it a little more unique. And you could still have, left arm pain and things like that, jaw pain sometimes, things like that. But it is a little different.
Right.
And I think, again, because many people think that heart disease is not that common in women, we tend to ignore those symptoms, thinking, it's something I ate, which, it may in fact be that, but we want to be alert to the fact it could be a symptom.
Right. And so especially if you have some of that history in your family, maybe some people in your family had heart disease or died because of a heart attack or a stroke, and you're having some of those symptoms as a woman, get it checked out. It's better to go call 911, actually. Really, if anyone is having some symptoms of a heart attack, and again, women, one of the best thing that you can do is, if you're able to go online and look at what some of those symptoms are, just so that like you said, there may be stomach discomfort, which you don't really think of as a heart attack. You think of more like pressure and pain in your chest. Oh, that must be a heart attack. You don't think, oh, gee, my stomach kind of hurts. Like you said, Lisbeth, they might think it's some sort of digestive problem, but it's better actually. And I know people say this all the time, I don't want to bother the EMTs. they would rather come to your house and rule it out. One of the good things about calling 911 is, and I understand that sometimes that's a barrier, because if your insurance isn't good, it can be very expensive, but you can't replace your life with any amount of dollars. So try to think of it that way. But on the emergency vehicle, on the ambulance, they can start giving you medication right away. If you have someone drive you to the hospital, they can't administer medication to you. The EMTs can do that. It can help stop a heart attack, and it can help to minimize the damage to your heart. So that's why sometimes calling 911 is your best bet. So one of the questions is, what do you think of coconut water? Lisbeth, I don't have an awful lot of experience with coconut water. Do you have any information on that?
A little bit. Nutritionally speaking, it's not really it doesn't really have a great benefit. It may be a source of potassium, but there's potassium in many fruits and vegetables that have other ingredients that we want. They have other vitamins and minerals that are beneficial. So I don't identify coconut water as anything special in particular, to be honest. And it's kind of expensive.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think to me that's maybe one of the biggest things. I'm looking at a nutrition facts label right now. It's not terribly high in calories or sodium or carbohydrates, so you might think it's a better option, but it's also not there's some vitamin C and potassium in it, but it's not really. There's no vitamin D in it. There's only a trace amount of calcium. There's no iron. So it's not maybe the most nutritious thing, that you can take in. And it could be something that it's only slightly different than regular water, and regular water can be free. So,
but if you enjoy it, in moderation now and then, sometimes we just need a change. I don't think that's something, terrible to drink, but I don't know that,
right.
From a nutrition standpoint, it's not contributing a lot.
Right. Okay. Another question is it teaspoons, or I'm assuming
Like
teaspoons
teaspoon.
instead of tablespoons of sugar daily considered excessive for someone with type 2 diabetes? And I'm going to give my answer first, and then I'm going to let Lisbeth chime in, because she is a diabetes educator. So if it's 2 teaspoons, then I would say no, because a teaspoon is about 16 grams of carbohydrates. So in general, and I have family members who have diabetes, both type 1 and type 2. So I know more about it than I'd like to, for reasons that I don't, I wish that my family members didn't have that problem. But when you're looking at, you can look at tablespoons of sugar, but it's better to look at carbohydrates as a whole in all of your diet, as opposed to just how many teaspoons of sugar. So a teaspoon of sugar is about 16 grams of carbs. 2 teaspoons is 32 grams of carbs. If you're consuming that in your cup of coffee in the morning or your cup of tea in the morning, that's not an excessive amount. But you're doing that 3 times a day, or once a day, or are you doing it 8 times a day, right? It adds up. So that's really the question: is it once a day, or is it 20 times a day? And Lisbeth, I'll let you go ahead and talk about that too.
Yeah, many people focus on the sugar related to diabetes, but all forms of carbohydrate are digested and become glucose that goes into our body, and we need glucose in our blood, or we wouldn't be here.
Right.
So that would be a bad thing. It's a lot of it is how much we have, as Wendy was saying, that how much you have at one time, how often. Added sugars don't contribute nutrition, so we tend to try and have people minimize them as a source of their carbohydrates. But small amounts aren't going to make a big difference. But again, if you're having 2 teaspoons with several cups of coffee or tea, that's going to add up. And those would be better spent maybe on food, as opposed to, sugars that aren't contributing anything. And when we talk about teaspoons, many of us are thinking, what comes out of our our silverware drawer. That may be a tablespoon is 16 grams or about 15, 16 grams. That's what most of us are thinking is a teaspoon. A measuring teaspoon has about 5, but there's 3
Ah,
teaspoons in a tablespoon. So, when we talk about teaspoons, sometimes we get, kind of depends on what that actual serving size is.
right.
But most of us, when we think a teaspoon, we're out of our drawer in our, silverware drawer, it's probably a tablespoon, and that is about 15 to 16 grams of carbohydrate. And,
Right.
everything else we said applies. You just want to be, not using a lot of it, but it's not going to be the
Right.
undoing of your diabetes if you had a couple teaspoons in the morning, if they were actual teaspoons.
Right, right. Right. And so, yeah, I am actually, because I'm a food nerd, I actually have a teaspoon that I use because I drink tea, I don't drink coffee, and I need a teaspoon to measure out my tea, and I use that same teaspoon
Yes.
to measure out. I use actual sugar. I don't use sugar substitute in my tea. I use regular sugar, but I actually measure with my actual teaspoon what I put in my tea because I'm a nerd and that's the way that that goes. But yeah, so yeah, it's portion sizes are one of the things that if you have type 2 diabetes, you really should pay attention to. And so like if I take this glass, how many ounces is in it? This is actually probably a 16-ounce cup or maybe 14. I don't know. I know I could get 12 ounces of seltzer in here and I still have some room. So one of the things to do is to take your glasses and get a real measuring cup that you use for cooking and actually measure, because it can be very deceiving, right? Your glass might be sort of shorter and wider and you think, oh, that's not that much. And then when you actually measure what can go in there, you're shocked. And so it's the same thing with the bowls that you have. How much cereal are you putting in your bowl? You want to actually measure it a couple, 3 times until you have in your head, what does a cup look like in this bowl? What does 8 ounces look like in this glass? What does 16 ounces look like in this glass? So those are all things that will help you to count your carbohydrates if you have type 2 diabetes. And as Elizabeth said earlier, that's important for heart health because controlling your blood sugar will help you to, protect your heart health as well.
For
So we have a
sure.
really good question. If we could add one thing to our diets to help our heart health, what might be good things to add? What do you think, Lisbeth?
Oh, that's a tough one. There's so many things to pick from. As with most things in nutrition in the United States, to be honest, I generally will focus on people eating more vegetables. That's probably the big hole in the American diet. And they have many things that we would benefit our hearts and the rest of our general health. But I wouldn't say there's any one thing, to be honest. I think that's a common thing that's missing from the American diet, or we don't eat enough of them, but there's no one thing. It's a balance. That's something we don't say very much anymore, probably, dietitians in the community, but it's a balance of what you eat. So there's a variety of things that play a role in heart health or just health in general.
Right. I'm glad you mentioned vegetables because yes, most Americans don't eat enough vegetables and fruit as well, fresh,
Yes.
So when SNAP Ed, and I know you guys have heard me say it a million times, make half your plate fruits and vegetables is one of the things that we teach in SNAP Ed. And all forms of vegetables count. So fresh, frozen, canned, dried, all of those can count towards your intake. And making half your plate fruits and vegetables is a really easy way to increase the number of fruits and vegetables that you eat at each meal without measuring anything. So I love that method. When you're looking at canned items, if they're canned vegetables, you want to look for low sodium options. If they're canned fruit, you want to look for options with no sugar added or in natural fruit juice or water to try and cut down on the added sugar. Natural sugars have not been identified as being detrimental to health, but added sugars, like Lisbeth said, there's no nutrition associated with them. fruit has natural sugar in it, but it also has vitamins and minerals and fiber in it that our bodies need. So you're taking in that sugar with all of those good things too. If you're having sugar that's added to a beverage, that's just plain, sugar, white table sugar that's been added to it, it's not giving you any nutrition benefits with it. So that's one of the things that we talk about. And when I think about heart health, I think about monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fats. So one of the things that people hear a lot about is olive oil. Olive oil is a high in monounsaturated fats. And if you can switch out some of those saturated fats in your diet, so butter, for example, is a saturated fat. If you're able to use less butter and more olive oil, that can be heart healthy, right? So instead of putting butter on your bread and you use olive oil, take the bread and dip it in olive oil, maybe with some herbs and spices in there to give it some nice flavor, and you're able to do that consistently, that can be beneficial for your heart health. Omega-3 fatty acids can be beneficial for heart health. They're often found in fish. So if fish is something that you like, including fish 1 to 2 times a week in some of your meals, all of those things are heart healthy. So those are actually, they said one thing to add for heart health. I just gave you a whole bunch. So it depends on what you like. If you don't like fish, you're not going to add fish, right? So, and it says if you can limit one thing in our diet, which would be the things to cut out saturated fats, right? So you're going to look, it's beneficial to look at food labels and to look at the saturated fat content on the food that you're eating. And one of my favorite little things to mention is that most saturated fats, including coconut oil, are solid at room temperature. And most of the monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fats, things like olive oil, canola oil, corn oil, they're liquid at room temperature. So including more of those liquid oils to substitute out some of those saturated fats. But the key is you can't just add the olive oil and keep eating the butter. You got to cut the butter out and use the olive oil instead, right? You got to swap those calories out. Otherwise, you're just adding calories to your diet, which could lead to weight gain, which could make your heart health worse. Okay, so what do you think about coconut oil instead of butter to cook with? Again, coconut oil is a saturated fat. Your body treats it exactly the same as butter. So it can have a detrimental effect on your LDL cholesterol, which is the less beneficial cholesterol. I always forget, which one is good and which one is bad. I try to remember HDL is helpful cholesterol. And the HDL is considered good cholesterol and the LDL is considered bad cholesterol. So, just like Lisbeth said about blood sugar, carbohydrates, we need some in our blood. It's the same with cholesterol, but you don't want too much, just the same as, blood sugar, too much is bad, just enough is good. Do you have anything to add, Lisbeth, about cholesterol?
Well, the general recommendation, I'm going to circle back to, what we should add, because in general, if we pick plant-based foods, that's one way I help keep it straight in my head, is that if it comes from a plant, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, olive oil, all the oils, maybe not the tropical oils like coconut and palm, but the majority of plant-based foods is the focus for heart health, and that encompasses a lot of balance and a lot of variety. So it's a helpful way to kind of keep this straight. When you get a lot of information coming in, if you kind of remember that, it's a good way to keep it straight in your head. Yeah,
right. So animal-based foods are the only ones that contain saturated fats. So, right,
except
eggs,
for the tropical
dairy,
oils.
Except for the tropical oils, right? Right.
A little piece of the picture. Well, they are adding more palm oil to things. You have to look at labels lately. I'm noticing they're putting palm oil in peanut butter and some other foods now. So you want to keep an eye out for that. It didn't used to be common, but now it's becoming more common.
Right. And just to go back to that question, what do you think about coconut oil instead of butter? I wouldn't use either one of those. I would use canola oil. olive oil or corn oil. I was speaking with a dietitian yesterday who's in the New York City area, and she was saying that um, she's of Chinese descent, and her father is a professional chef, and they would use a lot of peanut oil, which
Yes.
is not, necessarily the healthiest option. It's probably better than butter, but not as good as canola oil. And he did some testing of different things, and he said corn oil came very close to peanut oil when he was making those types of foods that were appropriate in his culture. And I was like, oh, well, that's really great information. So coconut or corn oil has a high smoke point. So if you're doing something like a stir fry or something that needs a hot heat, you're going to use corn oil or canola oil, not olive oil, because that can burn on you just like butter can. Yeah, I just have another question. What types of tests can you take to whether or no you have heart disease? The blood test can be for your cholesterol. That can be a clue sometimes. And then do you have any others that you know of, Lisbeth?
Those are primarily the things they'll test. They'll test for a lipid panel they'll test for LDLs, the bad cholesterol, HDLs, the good cholesterol, triglycerides. Now, triglycerides are also influenced by sugar and alcohol in our diet. So you want to keep an eye on those as well. But those are the things they generally test on that panel that they do. And that gives your primary doctor or your cardiologist a pretty good idea of where you stand. If they feel they need additional testing, they'll go from there.
Right. And oftentimes I think of like they might do what's called an EKG or an echocardiogram, where they actually do a visualization of your heart. They can do, an ultrasound of your heart to look and see if there's a disease process going on. Yep. So those are some of the things, but those are all things that you definitely would talk to your doctor about. Here's a really good one. Should people with heart problems avoid? Oh no, wait a minute. I want to go back to tests. Okay. If you have to cook for someone else who has an issue with their heart, how do you convince them to get on board with healthier food? Give me some suggestions, Lisbeth.
Well, dietitians face this every day. We talk to people as we're trying to convince people too. But if it's a family member, often what I've done, like with my children, is I'd be a good role model. I would do it. If rather than talk about it, I would just do it. And when they would see that I was coming up with ways to enjoy my food that were healthy, sometimes actions speak louder than words. If you're doing it, sometimes other people will get on board. You don't want to make it a big argument, because one of the things I learned as a dietitian, it's my job to educate people, but it's not my job to make the decisions for them. But, being a good role model helps, talking about healthy foods, supporting them, in any effort that they make to eat healthier, to positively reinforce that by recognizing it. I mean, not overboard, but, just encouraging them when they do something that's a good choice.
Right. I love that idea of being a role model. I think that's really good. That's a really great suggestion. I think that for myself and having family members who have different chronic diseases, one of the things that I've said to them is, I love you and I want you to be as healthy as possible for as long as possible, but I can't do it for you. I can't make those decisions for you, but I just want you to know that's how I feel. And I know that that's been effective with some of my family members. So that's something that you can do, you can try. I know I've felt bad in the past because I feel like I'm nagging them, right? And nobody wants to be a nag and nobody wants to listen to that. So, trying to be a little more like telling them how I feel about it. And how their actions affect me. Sometimes that can be helpful.
I totally agree with that.
Yeah. Should people with heart problems avoid eating meat? If yes, does it matter if it's chicken or pork or red meat that you limit? Go ahead, Lisbeth, answer that.
Well, you want to kind of go back to the idea that it's saturated fat that we're trying to limit. And some sources of protein have more saturated fat than others. Typically, red meat, when people say red meat, they usually mean pork, beef, and lamb. Now, there are different cuts of those types of foods that are leaner than others. There are many high fat cuts of those types of foods, and that's the issue. And also the portion size. I mean, I would have people tell me sometimes that they never eat red meat. They never eat the ones I just mentioned. They only eat chicken and turkey, but they were eating very big amounts of chicken and turkey. And the saturated fat in a large portion could end up equaling the amount of saturated fat in a smaller lean portion of pork or beef. So really, you know, the portion and the cut of the meat are very important. It's a, you know, an answer that's hard to be black and white. Nutrition's like that. It's not always black and white, but sometimes it comes across that way. And I eat red meat occasionally, but I eat a small amount and it's very lean, and I don't eat it very often. Same, pork can be very lean, but again, I limit my portion of all of my protein foods. Many of us eat more than we need. The size of a deck of cards is roughly a serving size for, say, a dinner meal. The chicken breasts nowadays sometimes
They're
are
huge.
3 times that size. So
Yes.
you could end up getting a lot of saturated fat in something that's a very large portion, or if you're eating,
Right.
you know, 2 big portions of something. So it's not,
Right.
you know, it's not as black and white sometimes, but in general, poultry and fish are lower in saturated fat than other choices. But, you know, we use ground turkey, but if you're not careful, you could end up getting a high fat version of ground turkey. You look for the percentages, you know, you want a high percentage of protein to fat.
Right. And, you know, a little suggestion with poultry and chicken and turkey, duck, those types of things, is to remove the skin, because a lot of
Yes.
saturated fat is in the skin. So that's an
And you
easier thing to
can
do.
remove it after you cook too. I mean, it's,
Yes.
you know, it
Yep.
counts
And
when
then
you take it off
sometimes
after
it's
you
easier.
cook.
Right.
Yeah.
And what is the best olive oil to use? I think just extra virgin olive oil, I've heard, has the best, or like the most amount of monounsaturated fats. And they also, you want to store it in a cool, dry place, a dark place. So it's best to get it in a colored bottle. You know, they come in the dark green bottles. I've seen them in clear bottles, but it tends to spoil more quickly that way. So where does milk fall on the list of hydration liquids? Can it be a substitute for water? You want to switch to low fat or fat-free dairy. Those are some of the suggestions that we use with SNAP-Ed, and that means 1% or less. You know, I think that if you like milk better than water, then it does count as fluid. So you can count it as fluid, but it does have some calories associated, and it does have some carbohydrates. There's natural sugar in milk, so you just have to keep those things in mind. What are your thoughts on that, Lisbeth?
No, I totally agree with that. I mean, milk is a great source of calcium, and it can be a protein source for some people that don't care for other sources of protein, but you do want to pick, you know, non-fat or 1%. And, you know, anything in excess is not necessarily beneficial for an adult. If you have no other significant sources of calcium in your diet, 3 8-ounce glasses will provide you all the calcium you need. But again, you may have other sources in your diet, and, you know, you could scale that back to 2 if you're eating other low-fat dairy products.
Right. Like yogurt or cheese, you know,
Right.
looking for the low-fat versions of yogurt or
Right.
cheese. So that's an option as well. I mean, it depends. If you really like milk, then you might be able to drink 6 or 8 glasses of milk a day. I don't know if I would be able to do that, but
Well, if you only need 3, you know, to me, that's kind of, you know, that's moderation. Yeah.
Right. Any input about avocado oil?
It has a high smoke point, so that means that, like Wendy was talking about before, it's not going to burn as much. It's another good source. It's just kind of pricey. It's very expensive usually. That's why I don't use it too much. But, you know, otherwise, it's a good oil to use.
Right, right. Yeah, I think I'd put it up there with one of the best, mono and polyunsaturated fats. I'm going to ask this question and mute myself because the dog is deciding there's someone outside. Plant-based foods are sometimes a little uneasy on the digestive system. How can you offset those effects?
Well, first of all, if you're going to increase plant-based foods, I'm glad somebody asked that question, because it's something I always try to remember to mention to people, is that when you increase plant-based foods in your diet, you're going to get extra fiber, which is generally a good thing, but you need to do it gradually. You need to let your body adjust to that. And some people have to, it's very individual what, the right amount of fiber might be for someone. And different types of fiber in food have different effects on the digestive tract. It's very individual. So you kind of have to just sneak up on it gradually. Don't do it overnight. Because there might be some interesting side effects if you did.
Right. Right. Yep. Yeah. And fiber is one of those things that can be very beneficial for heart health. It's some fibers found in some whole grains, and many of the antioxidants that are found in plant-based foods like fruits and vegetables can be very beneficial for heart health. But most Americans don't get enough fiber every day. The recommendation is for like between 20 and 30 grams a day, and the average American gets about 10 grams. So if you go from usually eating 10 grams of fiber a day to, oh, I have to eat 30 grams, I'm going to eat 30 grams of fiber today, tomorrow you are going to be a very unhappy camper. So don't do that. If, try to sort of figure out how many grams of fiber you're eating currently, and you can do that. You can look up things online that will help you to figure out how much fiber is in the certain foods that you're eating. You can read labels to find out how much, and just sort of add it up. And if you think that maybe you're not getting enough fiber, like Lisbeth said, gradually add more. Whole grains are an excellent source of fiber. Sort of, you get the most bang for your buck with whole grains. So for example, if you were going to eat a bran-based cereal for breakfast, that oftentimes can have between 9 and 10 grams of fiber in one bowl. That's a pretty large amount. If your total for the day is supposed to be between 20 and 30 grams, you can get almost half of what you need in one sitting. But if you're not used to eating that, don't switch to that right away, gradually, increase that. And like a half a cup serving of fruits or vegetables might have 3 or 4 grams of fiber in it, right? So the whole grains a lot of times can, really sort of bulk up your fiber content. So those are all things to keep in mind. I have found personally, and with other patients that I've had, once you start eating a higher amount of fiber every day, your body will adjust to it. Your
That's what I was
digestion will be better. You're right, exactly. That's what you're alluding to, Lisbeth. Yeah, your body will adjust to it. You will have less of those digestive problems with that higher fiber once your body adjusts to it. So that's something to keep in mind. Is venison considered a healthier choice for meat? Go ahead, Lisbeth.
It's a great choice. It's very lean. I find it challenging to cook, but if you have those skills, you have to cook it carefully so it doesn't get tough and dried out. But it's a great source of protein that's very lean.
Yes, I've had it in soup before. I think it's one of those great things to do with sort of wet cooking methods.
Yes.
So like in a crock pot with a little bit of liquid, or in a soup, it's delicious and very lean, right? So, right, like you said, I think that some people can make venison steaks. I'm not one of those people. And make them taste delicious, but yeah, right. Yep. Yeah. My husband won't let me near the grill. He says, oh, I get distracted and I walk away, and then we end up with shoe leather, no matter what it is. Chicken, turkey, beef, doesn't matter. So I don't get to do that. Other things I can do. Right. Whole fat yogurt is getting popular. Thoughts on how it relates to heart health? What do you think, Lisbeth?
Well, a lot of this came from a study that said children who ate low-fat products, maybe ate more because they weren't satisfying. But what happens sometimes in nutrition is one study will kind of just get expanded into being for the whole population, and that's not necessarily the case. I mean, young children should have under the age of 2, we usually encourage whole milk products just for brain development. But beyond that, adults generally do not need animal fats in their diet like what's in whole fat yogurt. But again, sometimes one study kind of just blows up into being applied to everyone, and that's not necessarily the case.
Right. So yeah, fat is like you were saying, Lisbeth, satiety is, or the fullness feeling, it's a thing, right? And fat actually helps to make us feel full longer. So some of the, we want to sort of cut down. We talk a lot about, choosing low fat items. You don't want to cut all of the fat out of your diet because that's not healthy either. Our body needs some of those fats to make things like HDL cholesterol, which is a beneficial thing inside our body. There's a certain amount of, what's called adipose tissue or body fat. We need to have some, you don't want to be at zero body fat. You wouldn't be walking around, right? So we need some in our diet, but we try to do more of the healthier ones, the mono and polyunsaturated fats, and less of the saturated fat. But you can't avoid all of it. It's impossible to avoid all of it. But like Elizabeth said, as an adult, right, we're not growing up anymore. Once we stop growing up, we don't need as many calories, right? We're not growing up. We're going to start growing out. And we want to try and avoid that as we get older.
Generally, yes.
Literally this way, yes. And so, we want to try to avoid some of those higher calorie things, and whole fat dairy, although you can use it, maybe you use it in some of the recipes that you have, but only on a special occasion. You're going to make the casserole that your mother used to make that uses, whipping cream in it or something. That's high fat dairy, but you don't eat it every day because over time that's going to, sort of come back on you. So, yeah, that's what we're going to say about the whole fat yogurt.
Yeah, and I think the important thing is, and I kind of said it earlier, nutrition often isn't black or white. It's not what you do once in a while. It's what you do most of the time. So would I eat whole fat yogurt occasionally? If I was at somebody's house, I would not eat it. I would just not maybe choose to buy that for my house of, something I eat on a regular basis.
Right. Yeah. I think that all of those are good options for us. The spices the variety, or variety spices the variety of life, whatever, one of those sayings. So all of those things, all of these components of our diet are important. And I think adding as many different types of foods as possible is a really sort of good general rule of thumb, right? As many different colored vegetables and fruits as possible, because all of those colors actually have a lot of those colors inside the fruits and vegetables are the thing that is the antioxidant in that food, right? So you want to eat red ones and orange and green and even purple or blue. You want to add all of those to your diet because all of them have certain benefits to them, right? I always think of, I have animals. So I think of my cats and my dogs, they eat the same kibble all day, every day, right? Humans aren't like that. We need to eat a variety of different things. And all of that, leads to balance, leads to moderation, as you've said, Lisbeth, and all of those things can benefit your heart health. The only thing that we did not touch on, because we had so many great questions, and thank you guys so much for all of these questions. They have been fantastic. We didn't talk about exercise, but that's something to keep in mind. Regular exercise is important. Having at least 150 minutes a week, which comes out to roughly 30 minutes, 5 days a week. So that's just something to keep in mind. You want to talk to your doctor if you haven't exercised in a while, make sure that you're healthy enough to do that. All of those things. But I want to thank you, Lisbeth. You are just a wealth of knowledge, and we love talking to you. I know we're going to do it again. I know we'll talk to you some more.
It's been a lot of fun. Thank you.
Excellent. And thank every one of you for joining us today. we will be doing a food demo. I'm going to be doing the next edition of What's Cooking with Wendy. It's going to be on February 25th at 12:30 p.m. on the New York State Office for the Aging Facebook page. And we're going to be making apple cinnamon bars, which is, sort of a nice recipe. It has some oats in it, which can be beneficial for heart health. So, and it's a nice little snack. Can be used as a snack, can be used as a quick breakfast. I thought I wanted to do something a little different, so that's what we're doing in February.
Sounds
So please
great.
join us for that. Yeah, I can't wait to do those. And this production was paid for by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and this institution is an equal opportunity provider. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us, and we will catch you next time.
Yep.
Be safe out there.
Bye-bye.